what happens is you have the Sony logo that we repitched so that it turns into the sound of tinnitus. So the Sony logo pings, it rings out, and that reverb tail is like an infinite reverb tail that turns into tinnitus. They say tinnitus here, Tim, not tinnitus. So he's probably wondering why I'm saying tinnitus. And that in turn turns into Stephen Price's strings, all in the same key. That then, out of Steve, while Steve's strings are still playing, the brake squeal of the Subaru that pulls up is kind of in a reverse echo thing. So that's in the same key. That pulls up, and then that then turns into the beginning of Bell Bottoms. One of the reasons for doing that, other than it's really cool, is that we wanted the audience, their ears to be pricked up from the first frame. So hopefully, what happens is that the lights go down, you're rustling with your popcorn and stuff, and then within the first 60 seconds, you understand that something kind of sound is an important part. The point of that was to try and convey that this movie, sound is important, and sound is something that you need to register.
The post-heist talk, and the music for that sequence is Harlem Shuffle, and it plays out as one. Did you say 3.5-3 minute sequence?
It was almost 5 minutes. It's 4 minutes and change.
And it's one
shot.
So it's a
One
continuous
shot.
So I really wanted to
Right.
just basically, let's talk about Harlem Shuffle. Like that day, how did you set it up? This is obviously, it's a long continuous tracking shot to music playback. So just walk us through how that scene got set up and how you executed it.
Well, it was very interesting because I am fortunate enough to get to go on the tech scouts, which are usually a month before. So, we mapped it out. Obviously, there's nobody there but, the department heads. And they told us where they wanted to put us. And I kept saying, nothing's going to work from this far away. The radio mics are not going to work. The Steadicam receiver's not going to work. So there was this beautiful alley. And it was about the halfway point. But it was so gorgeous. I knew at some point they were going to want to shoot into it. Because we pushed him, we pulled him, we did 180s, we did a 360 in the coffee shop to introduce Lily James. So we had thumpers set up in the coffee shop for that dialogue.
When you say you said you set up thumpers in the coffee shop, what does that mean?
Well, we killed the music so we could get the dialogue cleaned. It was just a couple of lines in there, which was fortunate, and then went back to full speakers. We had speakers hidden behind city garbage cans, plants. My boom operator is standing in the scene on the phone, and then once we get into the 180 where it gets a little tighter, he's booming the street preacher, the woman yelling at the thing, and that sort of stuff. But it was interesting because we had a rehearsal day on a Friday. We shot it on a Saturday, obviously to get the access for that almost 4 city blocks. And we were next to a federal courthouse, so they wouldn't let us play the music. So we rehearsed without music. So I was very happy that that was day one of the production and that it was successful and it was in the rearview mirror. So
Wait a second, that was the first day of the
yes.
shoot? Oh my! And it was probably just about the hardest thing in the entire schedule.
Tequila was particularly challenging because we wanted the gunshots, the flashes of the gunshots, to be in sync with the music too.
Get him! Baby, don't let him get away! Do something! Get him! Oh, shit! Get us out of here, baby. Let's move. Come on, let's go. Move.
So I provided time code to, of course, the cameras when we were shooting Alexis in the parking lot, video assist, Paul at editorial, and a time code feed to the dimmer board. Edgar a lot of times would change the speed of the music. So that was always, again, on the fly. So it was all very challenging. Every day it was like, okay, have we thought of everything that may come up?
Can you guys tell the story as an example of how Denis works with music of Kay's walk in the Las Vegas desert, how that started out?
Ron sat in that hot seat. That's your story, my friend.
It's a great story.
So there's this big queue that goes there, and they had written all this beautiful music that, went from him starting to walk from the car all the way to the bees in the whole section, right? It's a 3-minute queue or so. We played it, and Denise like, okay, let's start going through the list and say, yeah, no, maybe not. No, take that out. I like that one, but no, let's not. We just kept eliminating everything. And I'm like, I'll back up a little bit. There was a moment halfway through our final or so where we were told by the legal department that we couldn't use any sounds from the original.
We didn't.
And we had had certain sounds that were like a nod to the original.
Well, yeah, because I would
it
think
was
you
really
would want
cool,
to,
right?
yeah, you would want to, you would want to have a little
Some
Easter egg, a little,
yeah. Some of them were the spinner sounds, elements of that, and there were all these big drum hits that, the big classic, bah, like
that you think of from like the opening
that's
montage
where they
of Blade
came
Runner,
from.
right?
I had taken those from the first film, blown them out to 7/1, and that's what Ron started with.
Yeah, and then Mark calls me at 9:00 at night. He goes, I just got a call. We have to get rid of all those sounds. You're a drummer and a percussionist. Can you play and record some tonight and bring them in? And I said, sure thing. So I stayed up till like 3 a.m. playing all these drums and recording stuff in my home studio. And I mastered them all in 7/1, brought them in the next morning, and started putting them through the whole movie where they were, replacing everything, including the very first sound in the film, the opening title. Right. So back to the Vegas walk, those were huge drums in that, and we had deleted everything else. I was okay. I said, Denis, all I got left are the drum hits. He says, well, play it, see how it goes. We hit play, and we sat back. It was like, boom, and then nothing. It's like this light wind and footsteps. It was so creepy. We all went, oh wow. It was really cool.
It's way more eerie.
Yeah, that's when mixing is the most fun, when you've got a bunch of people together and suddenly something like that happens and everybody in the room knows that it's happened.
The first time I saw the film, the sequence, they're in Vegas and Kay and Deckard are fighting in the showroom with the malfunctioning holograms. That was the scene that just completely took my breath away. It just was just so exciting from a sound perspective. So can you talk a little bit about that scene? Because I also understand that went through a little bit of an evolution.
Yeah, I mean, it started off as a sequence scripted very differently where Deckard was sort of using a cacophony of different music to lose Kay in that sort of in that arena. That is to say that when we entered that scene, the first thing we would have is Elvis singing, and then it wasn't glitching out. Originally, the idea was you'd have a whole performance running the whole way through the scene. But on top of that, sort of superimposed on top of Elvis, first Marilyn Monroe singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." Liberace playing the piano, a Bollywood dance troupe, a tiger, an elephant. I remember it just got insane. There was like this
just more
build up of
Yeah.
insanity.
A cacophony, really.
And that's, in itself is a great idea. It just turned out that when we played the first cut of the film back with that in its original incarnation, first of all, it was visually and sonically confusing, which was sort of the idea. But, visually we were losing where Deckard and Kay were in the room. It was just kind of cluttered. Visually, it was cluttered because of all of these elements that had been filmed in separate passes. So to some extent, Joe Walker was then able to look at what he was able to remove. And it was his idea, maybe we have like a broken projector and maybe Elvis is just sort of sporadically appearing around the room. Right. This left us with a problem of, what are we going to do with the sound? And, originally the idea was that we don't really hear anything. There's this cacophony of music going on.
Yeah.
Continue with your story.
Yeah, there were sounds like we called it the motorcycle sound. There
Right,
was,
or the seagull.
Or the seagull.
You're talking like, so I watched the film again, and like and some of the Los Angeles city soundscapes. There's this what sounds like a really loud engine revving. Is that what you're talking about?
That's
Yeah,
the score.
that's the score.
Yeah.
That's I thought that was you guys.
Exactly.
Right,
That's
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
You never knew what was what.
He's getting credit for things we did too.
Yeah.
So let's be clear.
There were times I'd solo some like, oh, that's mine. I thought that was Doug's.
Caution. Keep clear here. Caution. Keep clear here.
Connect to Off-World anytime, any place. Packages start at 20 minutes. Many options available.
Sony Shastro. Sony Gongsa. Joy goes anywhere you want it to go.
Connect to Off-World anytime, any place. Packages start at 20 minutes.
It became clear that he had spent so much time and energy on the visual design of the creature and the sculpting, and he sculpted the maquettes himself. Like he really got in with the production design team that was working on the creature and really did it with him. Was there a similar involvement for him with the sound of the creature? Because I can imagine that must have been equally important to him.
At first, no. It evolved though. I mean, at first there was a lot of room to breathe. It's in the script. We know what this guy's meant to be. He's not a monster. He's a creature. He's an entity, and he's a romantic lead. And so that was all kind of like laid out in the first meeting. He touched on that, but he knew he didn't need to elaborate any more than the script already had. It would be a waste of time, and so it was kind of just a blank slate. For me personally, I knew that the audience would need to relate with this guy. He had to be a romantic lead. He had to be something that we can identify with.
If the love story doesn't work, there's no movie.
Well, that's exactly right. And so, in order to sort of meet the audience in the middle, right? Because you're asking a lot of the audience to get them to empathize with and be kind of on board with this beautiful relationship that develops between him and Eliza. Really the best way to start was with humanoid sounds. And so ultimately I wanted him to sound unusual and without being alien. I didn't want him to sound inhuman. And so I started with my own voice and then added animal sweeteners to that, some recordings to honor the gills, like the liquid rolling in his gills, because a lot of that is built into the script and the design and everything that you sort of touched on in terms of how much work went into building this creature. And then we, for Final Pass, brought Guillermo in, and he gave us a sort of breathing respiratory layer that sort of, once all of that got in there, and there a lot of massage went into that track, wide track, you wound up with something that sounded like a humanoid, a believable, convincing, inventive entity,
Yeah,
a personality,
Guillermo,
right?
Guillermo talked early on, like from our first meeting, about vocabulary and about the conversation went very quickly from what voice artist are we going to get to voice the creature to Nathan providing tests using his own voice, and the riddle was solved, right?
Immediate approval.
Immediate. No voice. We had our voice artist.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And he's here.
Yeah.
Right.
So did
And
you
that-
get into
it went-
you
just
got into SAG because of that?
I wish. I did get credited. Guillermo and I were credited for the voice of the creature.
So, but there's partially Guillermo's voice as well.
It is.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and then this is what I mean. Like when I say that, like, you know, the process with him evolved. I should say with them, because it was with Guillermo and with Sydney and with Cam. You know what I mean? That process evolved over time from being just sort of like, let's throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. You know what I mean? Well, hey, it's stuck. Now let's work on it. When I started bringing my system in to work with them in person, that's when the vocabulary started to expand. You know, because like when you focus on a single scene, you can really deck out one scene and detail it out and make it sound pretty and add every little steam hiss and, you know, create reverbs. But then when it's time to do the whole movie, you kind of have to broad strokes it, right? And so, you know, in the beginning, it was just like a one long pass of straight performance, and I played that for them, and it was missing so much because it's a single layer, it's a single channel of a creature that would ultimately become 64 tracks wide, you know what I mean? And so they, you know, I think that they got it though pretty quickly, because the notes I was getting back was, okay, so in this scene, the emotion isn't quite what we were going for.
You know, obviously, it wouldn't be a Christopher Nolan film if there wasn't a little controversy about the sound.
Did we make it too loud?
So I'm always tickled by these conversations about the questions about the dialogue intelligibility for Bane, or in Interstellar, or questions about the noise level in Dunkirk. But what I wanted to kind of open up to you guys in terms of a question is, it feels like Chris Nolan as a storyteller is just using sound in a fundamentally different way than most filmmakers are. So can you talk about a little bit about that, and maybe why that manifests in some differences in the track than maybe the audience is used to hearing?
Yeah, I would say that, Chris is, if you go to the opera, you do not understand every single word of that operatic singing.
Right.
You would enjoy it as an overall element and is moved by that overall element. Yes, you are. We have become such a spoon-fed society with dialogue, got to understand, got to read lips. And I think people become lip readers because that's what they're focused on, not the idea of stepping back and saying, what do I get from this? If a person walks into a room and holds a gun up, something's going to happen.
Right.
They don't have to say, I have a gun and I'm going to hold it on you. Story is told by the picture. So Chris's ways is, I think it's more of a art form of saying, let the audience kind of decide and make up their mind with a scene.
Right.
Because Chris has said over and over and over, because there's a lot of times that we don't understand certain things or why we're doing certain things. But he says at the end of it, he says, did you understand that scene? Well, yeah, the moonstone helped these guys out of the oil slick.
Right.
You don't have to understand every single word of that scene. You understand that there's a rescue going on and they're pulling guys on board.
Right.
So the understanding of the scene is Chris's intent. Let your audience develop their own timeline of that understanding. Let it unfold.
Yeah.
It unfolds at different rates too. Some people, man, they get it right off the bat when, something's going on. They don't need to hear the dialogue. Other people, it's like, oh my God, what'd they say? And then they start worrying about what they thought they missed. Well, that really doesn't have anything to do with the scene you're watching. So that's where I'm coming from with it.
It's funny because with Interstellar, which had the big controversy about the music kind of overriding the dialogue, when I saw it, the first time I saw it, I thought it didn't bother me. I'm like, I understood the movie. I knew what was happening. I knew that McConaughey was leaving and his kid was hugging him, and they were saying something like, I love you. I'm sorry, I'll never see you again. But I couldn't hear it. But I knew that.
Right.
And then I watched the movie a couple more times, when the whole controversy happened, and I thought, I don't see the controversy. I understand the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like I recorded the dialogue that's being obliterated in parts by the music, but it doesn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it bothering all these other people?
And you guys use that really effectively in the film. There are a couple of instances that I remember from my viewing of the film where and I may be misremembering it, but my impression was the track drops to things become very quiet. And then this screaming starts in a very specific point, then it just gets louder and louder and louder, and it just the anxiety level starts to build for you.
Yeah. It was a long, interesting, quite fascinating process to come up with that sound and to have it evolve from the kind of this beginning distant howl that slowly becomes a scream that slowly just becomes this ear-piercing, almost animalistic.
Yeah.
So
without asking you to give away the secret sauce, how did you create the sound?
Well, I built a siren. I got an air raid siren and put it inside a steel drum, and we rigged it up, took it out in the desert, and fired it up. And that was sort of I would say in quotes, the pure component of the sound. And it probably was not far from what they originally sounded like, because they were simply air raid sirens,
right.
And
mounted onto the plane.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the Stukas had enormous dive brakes too that opened up when they dove to regulate the speed of fall. I'm sure they added something to the sound, but most of it was the sirens themselves. And then we just started experimenting with how to amp that up and how to make that more less literal and more it just had to say terror,
right,
and unstoppable terror. The siren was something that was mentioned a lot in the historical references, and we knew it would be very important. So that was one thing he mentioned when we first talked about Dunkirk. I had read the script. He just gave me kind of a brief, rundown of the things he was thinking, and of course, a lot of that we moved on from later. It was a constant evolution, and I don't think I think Chris's genius is that he never stops searching and looking.
Right.
It's not a fixed. The script is not a fixed version of what the film's going to be. It's a blueprint which
he's exploring,
which one deviates from as one learns the film,
yeah.
and as the film is being discovered. And
so we touched a little bit on the production tracks, and obviously, your job is to, in some ways, is one of the hardest ones. You're on the set when the cameras are rolling, capturing dialogue and production soundtrack that then goes to Richard King's team to edit and then ends up in Gary Rizzo's hands for mixing. But excuse me, tell us a little bit about the process of being on Chris Nolan's set and gathering sound. I can imagine this movie was particularly challenging for you.
It was. I mean, this is honestly probably the hardest movie I ever did. It was mostly the elements, the rain and the water, the salt water, the boats. Always, like, we spent so much time on the water. I think I was like downstairs on the Moonstone for like 40 days, like out on the water. I mean, it's just, thankfully I don't get seasick, it turns out. I didn't know. But I think the thing about Chris is, like, he wants everything to be real. He wants to shoot in the place where the thing happened. He wants to shoot with real boats. He doesn't want to CG stuff. He doesn't want to do green screen. So, the hardest thing is just whatever elements are in the real environment. In this case, especially wind. There's tons of wind, because even just on the beach at Dunkirk, there's kind of a steady 30-mile-an-hour wind all the time. When I went on the Scouts, I was like, okay, the wind is going to be the biggest issue here. And then it turned out salt water, also a big issue. Because we'd go out on the mole and the waves would hit the mole and it just come like right over your head. And it's like just protecting all the gear. Everything was over the shoulder pretty much too, because you couldn't use car to carry everything everywhere.
Wow.
But and then whatever the conditions are, you're just trying to get the best sound you can. And so it was challenging at times.